Can you hear me? I knew you could hear me before anyway, but first matter of business. Has anybody seen a box that's like this tall and this big that weighs 50 pounds and says litter robot on it? It says it was delivered at 5:30, and I have no idea where it is.
It's a robot.
What? I looked everywhere. I looked at the, huh? Oh yeah, I looked everywhere. They said that the litter robot 3 that I have was sufficient for 3 cats, but I have 3 cats of, what is it in Princess Bride? ROUSs, rodents of unusual size. They're cats of unusual size. So I had to get a second one, and it says it was delivered, but oh well. Anyway, if you see the litter robot 4, let me know, okay? Anyway, so let's start with a prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. We ask for the intercession of Our Lady as we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good evening. Thank you guys for being here. Tonight we are going to talk about the idea of participation, what it is, what it isn't. The Second Vatican Council gave us the very first document that was written for the Second Vatican Council was the Constitution and the Sacred Liturgy. And in this document, very early on in paragraph 14, it talks about the idea that Mother Church earnestly and desires that all the faithful should be led to a fully conscious and active participation in the liturgical celebrations, which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. And then it goes on and it talks about how pastors have the responsibility to teach what that means. And I think perhaps over the last several years there have been some misunderstandings as to what participation really means, especially full conscious and active participation. And so it is my desire to endeavor to try to talk about that today and to go over some ideas of what participation looks like, or rather what participation ought to look like, and also what participation perhaps ought not look like. Now, I'm young, and I was not around in the 50s and 60s when I hear about a lot of people that refer to those days in the church as the bad old days, because Mass was not really quite understood. It was the Latin Mass. The priest would stand up at the altar, I'm going to say facing in the same direction as all the people, but often kind of colloquially people say, oh, the priest had his back to us because he was up there doing his own thing, and we were out in the pews doing our thing. Now, the first time I ever went to the traditional Latin Mass in like 2008, I guess I already had an understanding of what the Mass is, and so I went to it, and it was really just this beautiful experience for me. It was a kind of a transcendent experience. But I talk to a lot of people, and they say, yeah, but back in the 50s, you didn't have the music, and you just had the one priest, and you didn't have all the stuff, and the priest was trying to just kind of get through the Mass as quickly as possible. And sometimes daily Mass was done in like 12 minutes, which I can't even fathom being able to say Mass at that rate. But a lot of the times, it's the priest is doing his own thing apart from the laity, and there's kind of this disconnect. At least that's what was stated by a lot of people, and perhaps that's what a lot of you remember as well from your youth, those of you who are old enough to have been around and to remember the old Latin Mass. Certainly that would not be anyone in this row. My dad tells the story of, in the late 50s and early 60s, his mean old Irish Monsignor pastor, I forget what his name was, I just call him Monsignor McGillicuddy, because it's easier. I know he had a real name, but it's just easier to call him Monsignor McGillicuddy. And my dad said that he was so strict with the altar boys, and he would yell at them, and he would fuss at them, and it's a wonder that they kind of drift. Yeah, it's a wonder they stayed Catholic, but they kind of drifted away. And so my dad particularly tells the story of if they would make a mistake, that after Mass, Monsignor McGillicuddy would go and try to kick them in the sacristy, which I just, we can't imagine that today. Go to jail. But because he was old and, they were young, spry little kids, they would jump out of the way, and he would kick, and he would miss, and he'd kick the wall, and he'd say, "Oh, I broke my bloody foot." And so that's my dad's memory of being an altar boy. Also, there's the part of the Mass where the water is mingled with the wine, and it's supposed to be wine, so you can't put, like more than a whole lot of water, because then it'll no longer be wine, right? Because you water it down too much. And so back in the day, they had this thing called the scruple spoon. Scruples, they wanted to do it just right, scrupulosity. And the scruple spoon would pick up exactly 1 drop of water, and then the priest would use it to flick it into the chalice. But my dad said that Monsignor McGillicuddy was extra scrupulous, and he would scoop the water, and then he would plane it off so it was a half drop of water. And actually, it was the altar boy's job to plane the drop in half. And if they didn't do it, then he would get mad, and he would fling it across the sanctuary. And so just all these, kind of stories about how interesting things were. Father Michael got this Irish whiskey set with the little, whiskey snifters, and it came with this little glass pipette so that you can put a drop or two of water in to open up your whiskey. And it's a glass pipette, so it doesn't have a squeeze thing. You dip it in, and there's a little hole that you cover up. It's like putting your thumb over the straw at McDonald's and, pouring it out. And so I've been tempted to take his water pipette from his whiskey kit to use to put a drop of water in the chalice. But maybe I'll get one. I don't know. But we hear these stories and these kind of what was really going on, and the altar boys might have kind of sort of known what was going on, but they didn't, because they didn't speak Latin. The priest would say Dominus vobiscum, and the boys would make fun of it back, and Dominus nobisco, they would say. There you go, it comes spiritu tuo. Look at you, Sally. But you're in the medical field, so Latin still has a place in the medical field. But there was often this kind of feeling of a lack of inclusion in the sacrifice of the Mass by the laity. A lot of lay people just sort of did their own thing. They would show up at Mass, they would come in, they would kneel down, they would pray their rosary, they would open their missal, and it was hard to maybe follow along with where the Mass was with the missal. I remember the first time I went to Latin Mass, I sat there with the little missal and trying to follow along, and someone finally told me, "Hey, just put the missal down and just kind of watch and participate in that way." And it was different for me in doing that. But a lot of people would flip to the back of the missal because, okay, well, here's the devotions. We can do the devotions, right? Maybe we'll pray these prayers. We'll do the Stations of the Cross, something like that. And so there wasn't really kind of an understanding of what was going on in the Mass. And so that's really not what the Mass is supposed to be, and that's certainly not what it was intended to be in those days, but that seems to be the memory of many Catholics. And then along come the 60s, right? Yay! You remember the 60s? Mini skirts, right? Revolutions of all sorts. Maybe not good revolutions, some of them. Yeah, all the stuff. Along come the 60s, and enter Pope John the 23rd, and he says, it's time to open up the windows. He says, aggiornamento, it's Italian for open up the windows, let the fresh air in. If you live on a cow pasture, though, and you open the window to let the bad smell out of the house, you don't always get, so you got to be careful when you open windows. So Pope John the 23rd convokes the Second Vatican Council, and it's meant to be this idea of bringing in fresh air to the church. And then he dies, and Pope Paul VI takes over, and continues. And after the Second Vatican Council had ended, and things started to get weird in the church, priests and bishops started to get disobedient. They started to teach things contrary to the faith. And the Pope was kind of like, whoa, hold on. Who remembers when Humanae Vitae was released? You remember that encyclical? The one that Pope Paul VI put out about contraception? All right, now okay, I didn't know the name of it, but now I remember. Yeah, and all the priests were, that got a hold of the early release of the document, they're saying, oh, this is no good. We had theologians at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. dissenting against it, saying this is no good, we can't have this, we're not going to teach it. And a lot of priests taught contrary to it. They would get up in the pulpit on Sunday and they would say, this is not true, right? Follow your conscience. Who remembers hearing that? Follow your conscience. Your conscience is the best source of authority for you, so follow your conscience, because if your conscience says something, right? You have to follow. So let's do an exercise. If your conscience tells you that the best thing for you to do every day is to go and take $20 out of someone else in your family's wallet. Your conscience is telling you to do that, right? Well, okay, my conscience is saying it, so I should do it. Does that make it right? Of course not. So when we talk about our conscience, we have to talk about a well-formed conscience, right? So our conscience has to be well-formed. We can at times have ignorance. We can even have invincible ignorance at times. But then there's ignorance that once we've been corrected on, or ignorance once we've been formed, right? Okay, you know what? It's actually bad to steal money. So even though your conscience was telling you steal the money, you should not do that. And so to go forward, your conscience has now been kind of fixed, let's say. It's been formed properly so that you know, okay, well, this is the way that I should live my life. So then enter in all of these social changes, all of this upheaval of the different revolutions in the 60s and the things that were happening. And, you know, it was jet age, right? It didn't take 18 hours to fly across the ocean on a propeller DC-6. You could now get on a DC-8 with jets, and 7 hours you're on the other side of the ocean. All of these changes in the world are happening, and just surely something has to happen in the church as well. And so then, based on the Constitution and the Sacred Liturgy from the Second Vatican Council, which was the first constitution that was written for the Second Vatican Council, the Mass began to reform. You may remember the Mass reforming kind of like throughout the decade in the 60s. There was an interim Mass in 1965 that looked a lot like the old Mass, but most of it was in English, right? The parts that were spoken were in English. The priest still did his prayers in Latin. And it slowly kind of changed until in 1970 there was a new Mass that Pope Paul VI introduced. And because it was new, novel, if you will, not novel in a sense of like a novelty, but because it's new, a lot of people decided to start kind of say, well, what is this? And what does it mean? And what is the ecclesiology? That is like, you know, the understanding of the church. What does this mean for the understanding of the church? Now, I talked to a lot of older priests that were in seminary and that, you know, went from the idea that, you know, it was a mortal sin during Mass for the priest to release his fingers during a certain period of the Mass. Like if the priest made a mistake in the Mass, or if the priest did something against the rubrics of the Mass, it was considered a mortal sin. And they went from that, while they're in seminary, to then being told, you're going to be able to get married, and all of these things are going to change. Right? Because there's all of this social upheaval that infiltrated even into the seminaries and the church in the formation of clergy. And so we've got this kind of whirlwind of all sorts of different things coming together. And then these priests are ordained, and they said, wait a minute, this isn't what we were told was going to happen. And then the new Mass is introduced, and then different things start to happen. A lot of abuses happened within the Mass and the way that the Mass was celebrated and the way that we understood what the Mass is. So I want to do a little exercise here, and I'm going to ask you guys, what is the Mass? It's a celebration of the Eucharist. What is the Eucharist? Okay, it's the body of Christ, but more than that, the Eucharist is, it's the source and the summit of our faith. But the Mass itself, what is the Mass? It's a sacrifice, right? And it's a sacrifice what is taking place in this sacrifice? What is a sacrifice, first of all? Right, the crucifixion is the sacrifice, but just a general definition of a sacrifice. Giving up something, but if we think about it like in a ritual sacrifice, not like I'm making a sacrifice to give something up, but a ritual sacrifice that's been all throughout religion since the beginning of time. It's an offering, right? It's an offering that one person offers, right? Who's the one that offers the sacrifice? The priest. And he offers it on behalf of whom? Yeah, whoever the people are. And he offers it to whom? Right, whatever God it is that we're offering the sacrifice to. And then, why is the sacrifice being offered? atonement, propitiation. Right? That's a good word, propitiation, kind of like giving God what he's due, right? Hey, I can't fix this, so I'm going to do something in propitiation for you, God. Okay? So the Mass is a sacrifice. Okay, so let's do the who, what, when, where, and why of the sacrifice of the Mass. Who is the sacrifice? Christ. Jesus is the sacrifice. Who is offering the sacrifice? But who is the priest? Jesus. Jesus is the high priest offering his sacrifice. The fifth preface that I think both of us have been reading for the last couple of weeks of Easter talks about Jesus as both the priest, the victim, meaning the one being offered, and the altar on which the sacrifice is offered. Okay, so Jesus is offering himself. Okay, and so what is it that's being offered? His body, right? So he's offering his body as the unblemished lamb, right? In the Old Testament, they would go out and they'd get the lamb and they'd offer it and they'd, bleed it and whatever, and then they would consume it as well. They would eat it in order for the sacrifice to be complete. Jesus is the unblemished lamb, the truly unblemished lamb. So he is the sacrifice. He is the priest. And to whom is the sacrifice being offered? Can we be more specific? The Father. Okay, so the Son is offering the sacrifice to the Father through whom? Through the Holy Spirit. Right? It all connects. Okay, so when is the sacrifice taking place? Okay, at the consecration. But really, the whole Mass is a sacrifice. But the sacrifice of the Mass unites all of us together throughout the universal church on earth. So when is the sacrifice being offered? St. Paul says that there was one sacrifice offered once and for all. So is every time the Mass celebrated, the priest is re-sacrificing Christ? No. So when is the sacrifice taking place? That's where. Okay, that was my next question. Good. And when? Good Friday in the year 33. Right. So the Mass is this unbloody representation of Christ's sacrifice on Calvary. We move through space and time. The altar is Calvary. It's the reason it's not on the same plane, right? You ascend the mountain, and the altar itself is elevated. And so the sacrifice is offered on Calvary in the year 33 AD. And why is the sacrifice offered? For atonement, for propitiation. But why did it need to be offered? We couldn't offer it, right? We sinned. Our first parents sinned, Adam and Eve, and we inherited that. We inherited that sin, original sin. And so there was no way, all throughout salvation history, right? Okay, hey, Abraham, go up and offer your son on the mountain. Well, don't do that. That would be cruel. Here's a ram. Offer the ram instead, right? Passover. Okay, we're going to offer the Passover lamb, the Paschal lamb. In the temple, there were the sacrifices being offered. Scholars say that the temple sacrifice was like, if you went to the temple during sacrifice time, it was like going to a slaughterhouse. And the priests were there like, up to their knees or waists in blood, and because that's what a sacrifice is. It's a bloody thing. So the sacrifice is offered by Christ on our behalf for our redemption. So the Mass, the liturgy, is the work of Christ in the midst of his people. At the Mass, we're not the ones working the sacrifice. We're not the ones necessarily offering the sacrifice. That's not to say we're not offering sacrifice, but we are not offering the sacrifice of Christ. And so how should we participate in the sacrifice of the Mass? The Church says fully, consciously, and actively. So fully participating. Our whole person should be present without distractions and with all of our senses. How many of us participate in the Mass without distractions and with all of our senses? I don't. Right. We try to. Right. We strive to. We attempt to. And there's certain things that can help us, right? Images help us. Different, we're not in the world when we come in here, we're in the church. So that helps with our senses, right? Our visual senses, our smell, incense, our ears. We hear something. It's not what we hear on the radio, right? Now, there was kind of an attempt in the church at one point to say, well, let's clear out the distractions, though, because those things, too, can be distractions. Maybe they can if, you're doing your devotion and the only thing you're focusing on is, praying, meditating on this decade of the Rosary, which isn't a bad thing to be meditating on a decade of the Rosary, but if that's kind of where you are and that's where your senses are, then you're not fully present at the Mass. And so our whole person should be present, which that means that we ought to do something to prepare ourselves. So come to Mass early. Come and spend some time in quiet prayer, preparing yourself for the Mass that's about to be offered. Thinking, what are the things that you would like to offer in the Mass? Would you like to offer the Mass for somebody, for an intention? Would you like to offer any sufferings? Would you like to offer any joys? Is there anything that you would like to unite to the sacrifice of the Mass? Conscious participation. We should know what's happening, right? How many of us know what's happening at every point in the Mass? I do. But I know, I got the book. But like at every point of the Mass, how many, we understand, oh, he's doing that because this, right? No. Like the priest washes his hands at the offertory, right? Says, wash me, Lord, from my iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. It's a purification. It's a ritual, make me pure. It's a reminder of my baptism. That's what, and it's a symbolic thing too. It's not like I'm actually getting soap and washing my hands. If you watch closely, I usually only just wash my fingers, my thumb and my fingers, because those are what I'm using to touch the host. The difference is, and this actually was a rubric in the Old Mass. The difference is, if I'm using incense, then I actually do wash my whole hands, just because you get charcoal dust and that kind of nasty brass smell, and so you kind of wash the whole hands. But we should know what is happening during Mass. And so what are we doing during Mass? What is the purpose of the Mass? Worship of whom? God. Which person of the Trinity are we worshiping at Mass? The Father. We're worshiping the Father, right? Because the Son is offering the sacrifice. So we're worshiping God the Father. We're not worshiping ourselves, which that should go without saying. But sometimes it can feel like when we focus overly on the community aspect of church and Mass, that it does kind of turn itself in on ourselves, and we focus more on us and our experience and our feeling and what am I getting out of it? When in reality, we're at Mass to offer worship to the Father. So we're worshiping God. What happens at Mass? I already mentioned this. The Son offers himself to the Father through the Holy Spirit for the forgiveness of our sins. And so we ought to be aware that every time we're at Mass, we are present for the unbloody representation of the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. We get to become part of that. We get to witness that. It used to be, throughout the history of the church, that you couldn't come to Mass unless you were baptized, because baptism does what for us? Cleanses us of original sin, but it makes us members of the body of Christ, the church, the body of Christ. And so, to be worshiping God the Father as part of the body of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ is being offered, and we are the members of the body that is offering that sacrifice. And so we're called to know what's going on. We're called to be conscious in what is happening at the Mass. And then active. What does active mean? This is where people, I think, can get confused in active. Yeah, well, again, but full, active, conscious participation. So, right. Yeah, doing the stuff that you're supposed to do, standing, sitting, kneeling, making the responses, singing, opening your hymnal to sing, But we have to recognize that those are kind of the externals of the active participation. So the role of the priest and the role of the laity in the sacrifice of the Mass are different. The body of Christ is made up by the members of the body of Christ, and the role of the priest is to offer the sacrifice in persona Christi capitis, that is, in the person of Christ the head, right? Everybody is a member of the body of Christ, and priests through our ordination are configured to Christ the head so that we may offer that sacrifice in the person of Christ. The laity have the role of offering themselves to be united to the sacrifice. So we talk about kind of external and internal participation. As Christians, we have the right by baptism to participate in the sacrifice of the Mass, right? So it used to be that you had to be baptized in order to be able to enter into the church to be part of the Mass. That's why the baptistries used to be outside, right? Go to Florence, right? Big, beautiful baptistry there. It's outside. It's across the doors from the church because you had to be baptized in order to enter into the church. And so as Christians, we have the right by baptism to participate in this sacrifice. But we're participating in different ways as members of the laity and as priests. As priests, we've been given the supernatural gift to be able to offer the sacrifice as an alter Christus, as another Christ. So we're active in different ways. Right? There's prayers that the priest says as Christ the head, and there's prayers and responses that the laity make as the body of Christ. And so how ought we participate, not participate in the Mass? First thing we have to do is we have to recognize that we cannot offer Christ's sacrifice. Only Christ can offer his sacrifice. Christ died for us because there was a debt that none of us could pay. Tim Nadolski cannot offer the sacrifice of Christ on his own, on my own, but configured to Christ through holy orders, Christ offers the sacrifice through his priest. Now, that doesn't mean put me on a pedestal. That doesn't mean that there's some special something, but it's through the supernatural grace given at holy orders that priests are able to offer the sacrifice in the person of Christ. That is, Christ is the one offering the sacrifice. That's why I can be a totally horrible person. I can be sinful. I could be a Borgia, right, or a Medici, right? They were bad popes in the Middle Ages. They had concubines and all this stuff, and they were bad. But that didn't mean that the Mass wasn't being offered efficaciously, right? It's not out of the one doing the work that the work is done. It's the work itself. So the work itself is the sacrifice of the Mass being offered, and as long as the priest intends to do what the Mass is offered. So we talk about interior participation or internal participation, external participation. So okay, we mentioned some of the external participation, right? Responding, singing, our postures and whatnot. But then there's internal participation as well. And that comes in again at the conscious, that we know what's going on. And so what are some ways, perhaps, that we internally or interiorly participate at Mass? What is my disposition? Again, that's why I mentioned the idea of coming in early, spending some time in quiet prayer. I know it's tempting, and I'm guilty of it as well, to say, oh, hey, I haven't seen this person in a week, and I want to catch up. But to be able to have that opportunity for that interior preparation. So what is my disposition? What was I doing before I came? What's on my mind? What am I struggling with right now? What is distracting me? What is preventing me from completely giving myself over to God? What is the part of me that I'm kind of holding back and saying, I don't really want to offer that? Those are the times in which we ought to come in and say, how can I prepare myself interiorly to participate with a proper disposition? What am I offering? What do we offer when we come to Mass? Joy, sorrows. Intentions for various people. Thanksgiving. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we bring to the Mass to offer. Now, we come and we offer, again, not in the way that the priest offers. We offer kind of out of our own baptismal dignity that shares in the kind of the priesthood of Jesus Christ as Christians. We're offering something, but that offering is then being united to the offering upon the altar, which the priest offers to God. So when I come to Mass and I'm preparing myself to interiorly participate, am I aware that Christ's sacrifice is being made present so that I may receive from the wellspring of grace and mercy? Even if I'm in a crummy mood, even if I feel like the preaching is awful, even if I don't like the music, even if it's too cold, even if I sat under the register and then complained that it's too cold. I'm just throwing out some hypotheticals here, okay? Yeah. And so we come to Mass. Am I aware of what's happening? And it's I almost laugh sometimes, like when people come up after Mass and they've got, for them it's a big thing, but a lot of times it seems to be something petty, and it's like, well, I'm cold, or I didn't like that, or the person next to me smelled bad, right? Well, that was your husband, so tell him to take a shower before you come. Or what? The seats are too cushiony, or they're not cushiony enough. Whatever it is, and sometimes I just want to grab people by the shoulders and, do you know where you just were? Do you know what you just experienced? Why are you complaining? And I'm guilty of it too. I complain too, right? No, I would never complain. Yeah.
Father Michael.
No. And yeah, we get distracted too as priests, right? We're looking out and we're like, what's that noise? Turn off your cell phone. Father, it was Leo's pacemaker. Okay, now I feel like a jerk. Father, it was Matt's diabetes alarm that only goes off like when he's about to, and you were giving him a hard time and like trying to make him answer you, and you were just tanking his blood sugar. Well, okay. Get distracted. But when we come to Mass, we have to realize what is happening, what is going on. This sacrifice of Christ is being made present to me. Not just like a symbol of it. It's not just like, oh, remember when this happened? No, every time we come to Mass, every time we stand before the altar, the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary is being made present to us. Because it is that sacrifice, as you said, that is the source and the summit of the Christian life. It is from that sacrifice that we receive all that we need to receive, grace, mercy, healing. And it is at that sacrifice where we are united to Christ, where we are conformed evermore to Christ, where we as His body are brought together with the head. And it's a foretaste of heaven. So we talk about active participation kind of in an external way. Can somebody make all of the responses, sing all the music, stand, sit, kneel at all the appropriate times? Can somebody do all of that and not be fully participating? Right. And how are they doing that? They're just going through the motions, right? And sometimes that's what happens. We just get to Mass and we're like, oh, I'm at Mass. Okay, flip the switch, right? You go to the movie theater and you're walking into the movie theater and you're like, oh, wait, this is a movie theater. It's not a church, right? The Force be with you, right? Watching Star Wars, and we want to make a response because we're kind of conditioned. And again, so that's why it's so important to have that interior preparation for participation. Likewise, someone cannot make any of the responses, can't sing a word, can just be sitting there with his or her head down in prayer, kneeling the whole time. And that person can be more fully participating in the Mass, more actively participating in the Mass, than the one making all the responses and singing all the hymns. Because that person is in tune with what's going on. Again, I mentioned like going to the old Latin Mass and you're trying to follow along in the Missal and you're like, where are we? I got lost. Whereas if we're able to just kind of enter in and say, here we go, here's what's happening. I know what's happening on that altar. I know why it's happening. Let me unite myself to it. So participation has both kind of an interior and an exterior version, if you will. Musical participation. When I was in middle school at St. Jude, they decided it was time to start a middle school band. So my music teacher said, you should play the saxophone. All right, I'll play the saxophone, right? Listen to little Jerry Rafferty playing Baker Street. I was like, that's my jam. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play Baker Street. It's the first thing I learned how to play when I was able to do all the notes. 6th grade, I was at the talent show in the gymnasium at St. Jude with a microphone right in the bell of the saxophone, playing Baker Street as best as I could as a 6th grader with 9 months of saxophone training in a gymnasium that's very loud and echoey with a microphone. And then my music teacher thought, hey, this is great. You kind of have a gift, I guess, for a 6th grader. You should play at Mass. Okay, great. So I show up to Mass, and St. Jude is a very large stone church. So if the gym was echoey, the church is so what do? They're like, hey, here's your saxophone, here's the microphone, we transpose the music, you're playing the melody. So there I am, honking away on the saxophone, the melody. You can't hear any of the singers because I'm awesome. I'm Kenny G. I'm leaning into that microphone. I've got it halfway down into the bell. And I bet people were like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Or even if I was really, really good, which I wasn't, but even if it was Kenny G playing, or it was Bill Clinton playing the saxophone, right? Remember Bill? Come on, he's a great saxophonist. The Cardinal Archbishop of Tegucigalpa also, he's a saxophonist. Lots of good. Bleeding Gums Murphy, The Simpsons. He was the guy that played the saxophone, taught Lisa how to play. Anyway, you could have the best saxophone player ever at Mass. He gets up there in that microphone, starts playing the saxophone, while the organ's playing, while people are singing, beautiful harmony. You'd be like, whoa, that's a little out of place, right? So just because one plays an instrument doesn't necessarily mean that it belongs at Mass. Just because that is the gift that one has doesn't necessarily mean that it is a gift that ought to be used in the worship of God. It can be used to glorify God, right? Because it's a gift, just like sports or just like dance, art. All of these things can be used to glorify God. But it doesn't mean that they have a place within the Mass necessarily. So I came up with the example for y'all, another 60s example. Just because you play the sitar, right? That thing from the Beatles. Now, crazy thing. So this organ has 350 different stops that you can choose, random, it's got snare drums, which will never be used. It's got a piano, which there's a piano right there. It's got, a guitar. It has a sitar. I turned it on and I was like, whoa, this is so weird. So we're never going to hear the sitar coming out of the organ speakers. But just because you play the sitar doesn't mean that that's the appropriate instrument to be used at Mass. And didn't plan on going down this rabbit hole, but probably particularly it's not an appropriate instrument to be used at Mass because it's used in another religion's worship. That's not to say that it couldn't be used, that it would be, just because it's used in another religion's worship, it couldn't be used, right? Go to Africa and they've got drums and they've got dancing and these things, it's part of their culture. If we, a bunch of suburban Americans, are like, I'm going to sit on my pillow and play my sitar. Now, when I was in Chatsworth, does anyone even know where Chatsworth is? No, not California. No, it's east of Dalton, right? And the church was in an old Chevy dealership that the diocese bought for us. In the lobby, there was a big Chevy decal on the tiles, and there was a Sacred Heart of Jesus statue sitting on top of it, and we called him Senor de los Chevys. And my pastor in Dalton was a Chevy guy. Of course, I'm a Ford guy. And Father Paul Moreau also was a Ford guy. And we would always joke with him and say the reason that he had to buy a Chevy dealer instead of a Ford dealer was because there was so much room in the garages that we could fit more people in. So, okay. But there, we were 98.9% Hispanic. right? So we had our Hispanic bands, and then we had a little English mass, and we had folks that played, and we had a banjo, and we had a dobro, like with the glass slide, right?
Wow.
Now that was what we had. So that was what we used. That was what music was, and it was awesome. I loved it because we were right there. That's what we had. But I don't think I would necessarily say at St. Clair, hey, does anybody play the dobro? And can you play it at Mass? I don't know if there's a dobro stop on there or not that we can set, but again, that will also not ever be set. But so we kind of give God what we're able to the best of our ability. But again, just because we're able to do something and do it well, doesn't mean that it should be done at Mass. I went to St. Jude. My music teacher thought for whatever reason that because it was St. Jude, we should sing Hey Jude during Mass, continuing the Beatles theme. And Lady Madonna, right? Because, hey, why not, right? It's about Mary, isn't it? Written by the same people, they're the same guy. Imagine there's no heaven. Oh, I don't want to imagine that. That sounds like a horrible alternate reality to imagine. I like the Beatles. They were one of the first, because my parents are old. They are, and they taught me the love of good. They taught me the love of good music, and so I remember like going to school in middle school, and in our art class, our art teacher would let us bring in CDs, and she'd play them during. My friends would bring all this modern junk that was like, they'd bring in the Backstreet Boys or whatever, and I'd bring in the Beatles. Everyone's like, "Why are we listening to the Beatles? This is stupid." I was like, "This is good music." Yellow Submarine, come on. I have a lot of Beatles stuff. Like in fourth grade in our drama class, which was like my introduction to speaking in front of people, was that fourth grade class. We had to lip sync. And so I lip synced Yellow Submarine. I had a Periscope that my mom got me at Zany Brainy. Does anyone remember that story, Zany Brainy? It was like the fancy, Toys R Us. And I had this cool little Periscope. It had mirrors that looked up, and so I held my Periscope and lip synced to Yellow Submarine. Would not be appropriate for me to do at Mass. So when we look at the music of Mass, there's a difference between sacred music and secular music, right? There's very stylistic differences, down to the meter, down to the sound of it, down to the way that it's written, down even to the notes. Yeah.
You don't want the guitar.
That's not what I'm saying. A guitar can play sacred music just fine, but it's if we're playing sacred music or we're playing secular music. Now, one of my favorite songs, as long as we're talking about old songs, is The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, right?
It's a good song.
Gordon Lightfoot just passed away. May he rest in peace. If it weren't for him, nobody would know about The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And he told everybody at every concert that he did.
That was on Lake Michigan.
The big lake called Gitchagumi.
Yeah.
Superior, they said, never give up her dead when the storms of November came. Yeah, that's right. See? So, if you come to Mass and the music sounds like The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, you might be like, oh, this is groovy. Folky, right? Kind of folk music. And then in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the hymnody that was written by people that liked folk music. Turns out there was really just one generation that liked folk music. We like certain aspects of it. Like I'll listen to Edmund Fitzgerald. I'll listen to a few of the. Cats in the Cradle.
Oh,
Yeah,
Cat
yeah.
Stevens.
No, that's not Cat Stevens. It's Harry Chapman, right? Is that his name? Harry Chapman. Chapin. Anyway, so there's certain. But when we come to Mass, the music ought to sound different than what we're used to hearing on the radio.
Okay.
Because we're in a different place now, right? It looks different, right? Feels different. Our senses, right? To actively participate, to fully participate, we use our senses. And so if I just come in and I hear the same thing, okay, then I'm not experiencing anything that's other. I'm not experiencing anything that's different. But then we look and we say, okay, well, what have we done for 2,000 years? Well, back in the first millennium, we started chanting, which was something that kind of, was inherited from the Jews and from other religions. Start chanting. We have Gregorian chant. This constitution on the sacred liturgy, written in 1961 or 62, said Gregorian chant holds the primacy of place in the Catholic liturgy, and that the faithful should be instructed in how to participate in that and how to know the responses. Okay, so Advent, Lent, we'll do, the Kyrie, which is Greek, not Latin. We'll do the Sanctus. Most people can do that. Mortem tuum, nobody knows that, and we're just...
Can we have that written?
Well, we have it in the hymnal, and it was announced that it's here in the hymnal. Anyway, so the one that we always do during Advent and Lent, like every parish does this. It's Advent and Lent, it's a penitential season, so we're going to do the Latin Mass parts, kind of tying it to there's something penitential, which is not why we're doing them. We're not doing them because they're penitential. Now, you notice the last Advent and Lent and then Advent here, we did a different one than the Requiem Mass, or as I call it, the Death Mass. That Sanctus, Sanctus. That's from the Requiem Mass, but it's the simplest one, so that's why it's the most widely used. But then we started doing that other one last Advent and then at Lent. People are like, wait a minute, I don't know this. Well, you know the words though, right? And you know what the words are in English. And if you can follow along the music in the hymnal, fantastic. But if not, there's a sense of interior participation whereby you just listen to the beauty. Where you can allow it to, okay, I know what this is saying. Let me follow the notes and let me follow the rhythm of it. And let me enter into prayer in that way. Now, we have done a horrible job of implementing and teaching this in the church for the last 60 years. I come here and I'm like, oh, we're going to do, and I haven't done a good job of it. And it's something that we're trying to work on in the coming months. After summer, we're going to try to really focus on some musical formation, liturgical formation, to help us to better understand these things. And then you notice sometimes also there's things that are sung that like there's no way you could sing along with it. Polyphony, right? Polyphony was for a long time kind of forbidden by the church because it was modern. It was like, oh no, we can't have this with all these different sounds going together. And then Palestrina, Pope's composer. He had his own little scola at the Sistine Chapel. Who's been to the Sistine Chapel? When you're looking up at the altar, if you look to the right, there's a little balcony, right? That's Palestrina's balcony. It was his. For him to go up there and do his beautiful music with his scola. And so, again, we can listen to the polyphony, whether it's in English or Latin or Spanish, it can be any. You listen to kind of just the different pitches, and they kind of fold together, and it's beautiful. We're preparing for Ascension and Pentecost, and last week's readings we heard, if ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will send you another advocate. When you go home, go on YouTube, look up, if ye love me, Tallis Singers, Tallis. Thomas Tallis was a composer of polyphony, and this is an English setting. It's just beautiful. It's short, it's just a little meditation, but it's an absolutely beautiful way to enter into prayer. That's why most of the time when you hear things like that, it's after communion, so it helps you to be able to pray. Then antiphons. So in the Missal, there's the antiphons, which are like the set things for Mass. They're the parts that are to be said at the beginning of Mass. If you come to daily Mass, right, you hear those at the beginning of Mass and then at communion. If you come to 10:30 Mass, you usually hear the beginning one. You hear the offertory one before the offertory hymn, and you hear the communion antiphon. Those are the musical settings for that particular Mass. Each Mass has its own musical texts. And they're from Scripture. And so those are the ideals that are used. Now, hymnody is an option, like Gregorian chant, right? Polyphony. Actually, antiphons are really kind of a 4 Gregorian chant, but in a chant. And then hymnody. Hymnody is kind of like the last of the options. Catholics don't know how to sing hymns. We don't know how to sing because it's not part of our tradition. We've got our Catholic, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we sang Immaculate Mary.
We all knew it.
That organ played, Immaculate Mary. Everybody sang. It was like, oh, just by virtue of baptism, everybody can sing Immaculate Mary. The organ's playing, it sounds beautiful. There's nothing more Catholic. Because we know those, right? Those we were brought up with those, right? But as far as like hymnody, it's not really part of our tradition because hymns were not really part of the Mass. Now, yes, in the olden days, people would maybe sing hymns during the Mass while the priest was offering the sacrifice. Maybe during communion there was a hymn that was being sung. But they weren't really part of the Catholic tradition. So now we have this kind of what we call the 4-hymn sandwich, right? We've got the processional hymn, the offertory hymn, the communion hymn, and the recessional hymn. Here we go, we got our 4 hymns. And there they are. And I don't care what church you walk into in the United States, less than half the people are singing. Doesn't matter how big of a choir you have. And I'm not saying that it's a good thing. It's just our culture. We haven't figured out, got to sing, even if I can't sing. Now, just because I say sing and you say, well, he says sing, and even though I can't sing, that doesn't mean go stand in front of a microphone. But to be able to sing. And then hymns that have to be written for congregational singing. So a lot of those hymns that were written in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of modern worship music, the modern worship music is really written for performance. So you might turn on the Jesus radio station and listen to Matt Maher, and he's Catholic, and he's written Mass settings, and you're like, I love this is great. But then if you come to Mass and Matt Maher we're trying to play Matt Maher, one, it doesn't sound like him, because he's the performer, and he's the only one that can. And two, it's hard to sing because it's performance music. And then we back up a few decades and we look at a lot of the hymnody, and they're written with weird key changes, and they're written way up here above the clef, and it's hard to sing, especially for men. And sometimes we look at the words, gather us in, which sounds an awful lot like the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, right? And there's that 4th verse that they hardly ever sing when they sing that hymn. It says, here in this place, not in the darkness of buildings confining, not in some heaven light years away. And it's like, what? Did John Williams write this? Or yeah, city. Let us build a city of God. Let God build his own city. Anyway, don't get me started on hymns. A good way to judge whether a hymn is appropriate for Mass is, does it address God? Does it talk about God? Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before you. Or, let us build a city of God. See the difference? Is it focused on us, or is it focused on God? And that's really an important question, moving beyond music, just kind of worship in general. One final thing. The organ is the preferred instrument of the church because it mimics the human voice, because it breathes. We don't have pipes, but all of the sounds that come out of that thing are recorded from pipes. And if you listen real closely, just when a single note is played, there's a p. It mimics the air coming through, just starting to come through the pipe. And as the pipe vibrates, it solidifies the note. So it mimics the human voice. So that's why it aids the human voice in singing. Just briefly, the idea of, when we're at Mass, is Mass centered on God? Is Mass centered on worship of God, or is it centered on us and our experience? Is it centered on how we feel? Is it centered on what we get out of it? Or is it centered on what we're doing for God and the fact that God is being worshipped? And even if I'm not getting anything, even if I'm grumpy, God is still being worshipped. So we talk about participation. A lot of times people, they confuse participation with having some sort of liturgical ministry, right? Which the word ministry really only ought to be applied within serving the liturgy. Otherwise, we use the word apostolate, right? It comes from apostle, ones who are sent. So like St. Vincent de Paul is an apostolate because it goes out into the community and serves the needs of others like the apostles did.
More than a ministry?
Yeah, it's different than a ministry. So a lot of churches say, we have 130 ministries. Well, you have a lot of apostolates, you might have services and whatnot. But so principally there's 3 liturgical ministries. That is the acolyte. Well, principally there are 2, the acolyte and the lector. Now, acolyte and lector are actually installed like offices. It's a lay office. It took the place of the minor orders that used to be called lector and acolyte. But the bishop installs somebody as a lector and acolyte. That makes them the proper person to be reading the readings at Mass. And as an acolyte, it makes them the proper person to be serving at the altar. And even to be able to do things that usually only the priest and the deacon can do, like purifying the vessels after communion. And then the acolyte is also the one that, if need be, beyond the priest and deacon, would be the one called upon to assist with the distribution of communion. Now, in the absence of the installed acolyte and lector, we have the altar servers, right? And they assist at the altar, they help. We know what they do. And we have readers, right? And the terminology is important, reader versus lector, because a lector is an installed position by the bishop, and it's generally leading up to holy orders. And then a reader is somebody who is taking the place of the lector and reads at Mass. Now, that doesn't mean that like everybody, in order to participate, has to be a reader. That doesn't mean in order to participate, you have to be an altar server. And then the third one that I put on here, which it's not really because it's extraordinary, it's not really a function. The extraordinary ministries of Holy Communion. It's in the name, extraordinary. It's something that should be used outside of the ordinary. It should be used when, as the church says, when there are not a sufficient number of priests and deacons, and that the distribution of communion would be so delayed. That's vague. That's classic church talk, because, well, what is so delayed, right? Mass is supposed to be done in 44 minutes, right? What is so delayed? So, here, particularly 4:30 Mass, 10:30 Mass, it's the 2 priests and the 2 deacons, and because that's our role, right? It's our role to give communion. Part of the reason that we're called Father is because we nourish you. And so it's not something that should be just kind of thrown around. A lot of parishes have armies, and people feel like, well, I have to participate in some way, and so this is the way that I'm going to participate. But you can participate right there in that pew. You can participate without standing up. You can kneel the whole time, and you can participate. You can stand up, you can sing, you can make the responses, you can participate. And then kind of beyond that, there's also other, I wouldn't necessarily call them ministries per se. They're more services, because they're in service of the liturgy, they're in service of the Mass. So sacristans, you serve by preparing for the Mass and assisting us in making sure we know where everything is. Giving me my water, thank you. Ushers, they're supposed to assist in greeting people and seating them and taking up the collection. But, we've all seen that episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, and they just stand around and talk. That's not entirely true. They do a good job of, and now that we've been filling up more and more, especially the 10:30 Mass, they've been doing a good job of cramming people in and getting everybody in the pews and, walking down the aisle and, Well, of course, it's the front row. Nobody's in the front row. And then greeters also, right? The greeters stand at the door and they're that first smiling face, and that's a very important role, right? Because, okay, hey, I'm at this place and someone's excited to see me and I'm coming to worship God, and that's a good thing. And especially if you're grumpy, yeah. Like when I walk in the door and, and there's Jennifer Praiser smiling with the door open, handing me a peppermint, I'm like, how could I possibly be grumpy anymore? So, yeah, different services, but you don't have to be a sacristan, you don't have to be an usher, you don't have to be a greeter in order to be participating at Mass. That being said, we need more ushers, and we need more greeters, and we need more readers, and we need more altar servers. We don't need any more extraordinary ministries of Holy Communion. We have a sufficient number for when the extraordinary need is needed. And that's not to say like you're excluded. That's not to say you can't. It's to say there's different ways in which we participate, and that, again, that which is proper to the priest and the deacon is distribution of communion. And because of that, it doesn't make any sense that one of us would be sitting up at the rectory playing video games while Mass is going on and not walk down to help with communion. So certain mistakes kind of in participation, and then I'll open for questions. And I know I didn't think I would go this long, but I only have a page and a half. So priest mistakes that priests have made and kind of trying to foster participation, and these are things that I've heard. People don't know what's happening during the silent prayers, so I'll say them out loud, right? A lot of times you'll see us up there at the altar, bowing to the altar, and, what are they saying? We're talking to God, right? So like washing the hands, wash me, O Lord, for my sins, and wash me, O Lord, for my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sins. Right before communion, there's prayers that we pray that are kind of like our personal prayers to God. Prepare me to receive Holy Communion. And so it's not appropriate for us to pray them out loud, just like it wouldn't be appropriate for you to be praying whatever preparatory prayer before communion you want to pray out loud. The people should imitate what the priest does. So like presidential postures, the priest is presiding over the liturgy, meaning he's the one who is overseeing everything and kind of orchestrating, in charge of everything. And so he has different gestures when he does that. The Lord be with you. And that's not me saying, the Lord be with you. It's an orans, it's a preparing to pray position. And so a lot of people, and a lot of priests, of course, they do the Lord be with you. Like they try to make it a gesture rather than I'm praying. And so then people say, and with your spirit. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's not called for. So I'm not saying don't do it, all right? Don't go, Father Tim said don't say and with your spirit, okay? I'm on camera, okay? Saying it. But the important part is the gesture itself, I think, is from a place of misunderstanding, that it's not yeah, you too, right? And we used to say, and also with you, which didn't make any sense, and also with you. I mean, when do you ever say that? When do you ever say, and with your spirit? But we're looking at the fact of, okay, as the body of Christ, right, our souls are brought together, and we're praying here, and our spirits are being united to God. Same thing with like standing and whatnot. The priest will say, well, I'm standing, so everybody should stand. Or, the priest will say, well, everybody else is sitting for the reading, so I'm going to come down here in my chasuble and sit and listen to the readings as well. These are all kind of abuses that confuse people. And the worst one is because people don't understand what's going on at the Mass, I should improvise and just make things up to make it more meaningful. Well, I know no, but a lot of priests do that. A lot of priests try, and I get people and they're like, oh, Father, we were at the beach at Panama City and we look at this picture, the priest trained his dog to carry the book of the Gospels, and I'm like, isn't that cute? I guess, but it's not really appropriate for Mass. Just the kind of, and innovation, that's where things get a little dangerous, where we try to innovate and make up and because the Mass is not mine, it's not my Mass, it's God's Mass, it's Jesus' Mass, it's His sacrifice. And His church that He founded and that He instituted said, this is the Mass. It's in that book. It's got black words that you say, it's got red words that you do. It's not for us as priests to go and say, well, it would make more sense if I did this. Or, well, this is confusing, so I'm going to do this. Or, well, this word is a little, I don't want to say that word, so I'm going to change it to this. So those are some priest mistakes that ultimately confuse people. And people, well, I didn't know, right? And Father had good intentions in trying to, help us. But now for us, ways of not participating in the sacrifice that tend to really focus more on ourselves, right? That try to make the Mass more inwards on ourselves. Mass is, the Mass is not a horizontal interaction, right? It's not, while there are dialogues that take place within the Mass, It's not me talking to you and you talking to me. It's Jesus talking to the Father, right? So the priest offers the sacrifice to the Father. Now, I think that that's really symbolized and embodied very well when the Mass is celebrated ad orientem. The priest does not have his back to you. The priest is facing in the same direction to the east towards God as you. The priest is leading you. You can use a battle image, right? He's leading you into battle. You can use the bus driver image. He's driving the bus, right? You don't want the bus driver looking at you while he's driving the bus. But because that's kind of fallen out of being the norm, Pope Benedict XVI kind of popularized it's referred to as the Benedictine arrangement on the altar. And the candles, they point up, right? And so while we're looking at each other, and while you're able to better see what is happening in the sacrifice of the Mass, it's a reminder to us that it's not directed at us. I'm not offering the Mass to you. You're not offering Mass to me. You're not offering your prayers to me. You're uniting your prayers to the sacrifice of the altar that's being offered to the Father. And so there's a vertical nature of the Mass. And it's when we focus more on that horizontal, we focus more on kind of community. There's nothing wrong with community. We focus on family. There's nothing wrong with family. We focus on meal. There's nothing wrong with meal. The Mass has meal aspects, but it's first and foremost a sacrifice. It does have meal aspects, but it is a sacrifice. So the ways by which we participate in the Mass that we ought to do, we shouldn't be kind of copying what the priest is doing necessarily. This one's a...
I have a question.
I'll get to that question. So let me just... I'm almost done, I promise. One of them is at the Our Father. The priest is in the orans position. It's a position of prayer, of the presidential prayer leading the prayer. And some people will mimic that. Some people, because it's turned into hand-holding, which, look, I got no problem with you holding hands while you pray, right? Especially as family. I'm like a cat, okay? I don't like being touched. So, like, I go to people's houses for dinner, and they're like, oh, we're going to pray. And then they stick their hands out, and I'm like, oh. Or, like, I'll grab their pinkies. So I'm not saying don't hold hands during prayer, during the Our Father, but it's not the prescribed posture. This is especially not the prescribed posture. Or this, where it's like I'm holding hands. That's the one that always gets me. You're on the end of the row. You're holding hands here, and like I'm holding hands with the air. And I get it. There's like my hand is open, you know, and sure, there can be good symbolism to it, but it's not the prescribed posture. So there really aren't a lot of prescribed postures for you, though, as lay people.
So what is the prescribed?
There isn't one. But the kind of standard posture of prayer is with hands folded. So I'm not saying don't hold hands, but also if the person next to you doesn't want to hold hands, leave them alone, right? Don't like stretch across the aisle. Don't play Red Rover. So that's one. And the other one, and you know that this is a particular pet peeve of mine, is the sign of peace becoming greeting time and social hour. Right? You can say hi to people out there. Some churches, they do at the beginning of Mass, oh, please stand and greet. They'll say, oh, as we prepare to celebrate Mass, please silence your cell phones and enter into a prayerful silence. And now please stand and greet those around you. And then it turns into this eruption of... And a lot of times that's what the sign of peace turns into, is this like eruption of, yeah, hey, how you doing? Pat on the back. Hey, yeah, did you see the Braves game last night? They beat the Rangers, finally. And that's not the purpose of the sign of peace. The sign of peace is meant to, it comes from St. Paul, if you've sinned against your brother and you come to the altar to offer your sacrifice, leave your gift at the altar, go and make peace with your brother, and then come back and offer your gift. And so the sign of peace is meant to be this symbolic gesture of peace. Turn to the person to your right. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. If you want to shake their hand, that's fine. If it's a family, give them a hug. When I was in high school, go to the Mass before youth group, I'd always sit next to the pretty girls, hold their hands at the Our Father, waffle, right? I was like, yeah. Sign of peace. Now I'm a celibate. Those are important because, again, the Mass is not about us. The Mass is not about what we're doing. The Mass is not about what we're getting. The Mass is us offering worship to God the Father. And so participation in the Mass should be full, active, and conscious, but most importantly, all three of those things have to begin first inwardly. And I think that's the most important point, is that to participate in Mass, we have to begin inside. That I'm fully participating with my whole person, that I'm active in what's going on, I know what's going on, and I'm conscious. Like, I know, okay, this is happening now. There you go. Questions? Mary Jo.
A lot of people try to imitate your arms and hands when you're on the altar. I like to stand like this.
And I don't know that it's necessarily imitating, or that it's kind of a,
What's the proper thing to do? Because
well, again, there's no prescribed posture other than standing and sitting and kneeling at the proper times. But most common, yeah, to just have your hands in prayer, or even like this. D.
that feels awkward to me.
Right, and it might not feel awkward to other people. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying it's not the prescribed thing, and it's kind of it's a more recent thing that folks have started doing. Just one second, Vic. D.
Could you explain the bells?
Okay, so the bells are meant to draw our attention at the important times. So at the epiclesis, right, the Holy Spirit is called down upon the bread and wine.
That's one.
Right, that's one. And then the consecration, ring, ring, ring. And then when the priest consumes the precious blood from the chalice, there's another ring that started recently, and that's to show that the sacrifice has been completed, because the sacrifice isn't completed until the priest, the one offering the oblation, has consumed it. A lot of people will say, well, the bells are a leftover thing from the medieval days in the cathedrals when people were all they were praying their rosaries, they didn't know what was going on, and so the bells were to catch their attention. We don't need those anymore because Mass is being said out loud in the vernacular, so clearly people are paying attention. How many of us get distracted during Mass? I do. I do while I'm saying Mass, and then the bells ring, and I'm like, whoa. That's right, I'm calling the Holy Spirit down. So the bells are meant to draw our attention. But a lot of priests will say, no, bells are not, don't use bells because we don't need them anymore. It's like there's no such thing as distraction. Vic.
Where does the word celebration of the Mass fit in?
So celebration, not necessarily in the sense of like celebration as like a party, but Vince, give me a.
I'm really trying to come up with something right now.
Okay, because I know that we've had this conversation before. But to celebrate the Mass, yes, it is a joyous thing. It is something that is happening to worship God, which we ought to celebrate. And it is something that's happening as the whole communion of saints. So,
I got it. Celebrate comes from celebro, celebrare, meaning to perform or observe.
okay. Yeah, so...
That's a whole different meaning that
Yeah, so Father's going to celebrate the Mass. He's going to perform the Mass. Father's going to say Mass, right? We hear that. Maybe we don't like to use that as much because it's like, well, you're not just... Or the old days, my favorite, I'm going to read Mass. Fulton Sheen used to always say that. Oh, I got to go read Mass. So, but yeah, and that word, because like, that's the problem with words, especially as they get translated, from language to language. And we're like, okay, well, Mass is a celebration, so, where are the piñatas and the cake? But yeah, so as the priest performing the Mass, but it's never. I don't think it's appropriate to say that like we together celebrate the Mass. The priest celebrates the Mass. He's the celebrant. We carry around a little card in our wallet called a celebrate, which says like I have the credentials to be able to do this. So like I could go to another church. In France, actually, they just enacted this thing where the celebrates have got a national database which I kind of like because I hate having to get letters sent. I also don't want my name in a national database. But the whole, like, we got to send letters to go can celebrate at someone's mass. And like I'm at the cathedral with a bunch of other priests, or I'm going to a priest convention and it's only priests, and I have to send a letter saying that I'm a priest in good standing and I can celebrate mass. It would be really nice if I could just pull my card out and they could scan it and be like, yep, you're good to go. But yeah, so the celebrate is what says that, like, we have the faculty, we're priests, we have the faculty to say mass. Surely there's more questions. Jane? Vic, go ahead.
I get a little confused between you and Father Mike. I'm not the only one, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, you at daily mass will using my term from the old days, do a low mass, a 2-candle mass instead of a 6-candle.
Yep.
And you do a lot of quiet praying to yourself. Father Michael will say it all out loud.
So I think he still does a 2-candle mass, but probably what you're referring to is the offertory. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for through your goodness we receive the bread we offer you, fruit of the earth and work of human hands. It will become for us the bread of life.
Blessed be God forever.
Right.
We don't get to say that.
Right. Because it says, if the offertory chant is not being sung, the priest may say it aloud. And so I just prefer to say it to myself. Well, not to myself, to God. But, okay, the idea of like low mass and high mass, 2 candles, 6 candles. Yeah, like daily mass, there's usually only 2 candles lit. And then, unless it's a feast or a solemnity, then they're all 6 lit, or we're having exposition, then they're all 6 lit. It's kind of a gradation of solemnity, right? So like you have these fine ladies over to your house for dinner. You know, you're gonna set out the chinettes and the plastic forks and the disposable napkins, and then you have Father Michael over. You're going to use the everyday dinner plates and the stainless and the stainless flatware. Yeah, and I come over. You're going to have the bone china with the sterling and the leaded crystal. It has to be leaded.
No. Mine's Atlantis.
But so there's kind of a gradation of solemnity. So that's why, like on Sunday, all 6 candles are lit. There's music. It's a higher celebration. Jim?
I think about the Last Supper. I think about when the guys show up. Hey, we're going to have dinner. You know, it's coming up on Passover. We're getting together with this really kind of cool but kind of weird guy we've been following around for a while. They're having dinner. And he says to them, "Hey, this is my body." I mean, it's so mind-blowing. I just can't imagine what's going through their heads. So in my perspective, I keep that in mind that, hey, I don't get all of Mass. I'm used to. The ability for me to really get it, so to speak, it seems to me that'll happen in eternity.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with missing pieces and parts. Sometimes it's a little embarrassing, but I just think about those guys. I'm like, how did they feel the first time they heard that? Just had
Right.
like,
Yeah, and I mean, they knew that it wasn't just the Passover meal. They knew there was something different to it. They knew that there was, yeah, and I mean, they knew that going into it. But yeah, I mean, to the extent that we can, we ought to understand the Mass as best we can. And that's always kind of evolving. Michelle?
Yeah, so you were saying that when you're saying the Mass and you consume the Eucharist and you consume the blood of Christ, then the bells ring because the sacrifice is complete. So then when we come up to receive communion...
Oh, I knew this question was going to come. The language of concomitance from the Council of Trent, that both the host and the wine, when they're consecrated, contain the fullness of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ in either species. That's why sometimes you'll see the little guy that comes up and just receives from the chalice because he can't have any gluten at all, because the fullness is contained. And then, okay, well, how come just the priest then receives from the chalice? Because it's kind of the fullness of the sacrifice. The priest is the one offering the sacrifice. The rest of us are participating in the sacrifice and receiving from it, but in order for the sacrifice to be completed, I mean, you don't even have to receive communion for the sacrifice to be completed. I do. That being said, the church says there's times when reception under both species is a good idea because it shows kind of a fuller sign. That doesn't mean that it's more full than just receiving one or the other, but the sign value has a more full, there's a greater fullness. So if you came to Mass on Holy Thursday, we offered both species via intinction because it was the feast of the institution of the Eucharist. We'll probably do the same thing on Corpus Christi. The church encourages at weddings and first communions and professions of religious vows that both species ought to be offered, but that it really isn't supposed to be like a regular thing. I know this is probably hard to believe, but I'm a germaphobe, and I think the common chalice is disgusting also. I know, it's just...
In the 60s,
I know, it's just, yeah.
we used to have Mass at home.
My mom had said that Mass was celebrated on the piano bench in our living room in the 80s, and when the priest said, "Oh, I forgot the wine, do you have any?" It was the 80s, so she went to the refrigerator, and she's like, "Well, I've got a wine cooler, which is malt liquor, it's not wine," and so there was an invalid Mass set on our piano bench.
We always had real wine.
But, yeah, so, I mean, and really, if you go around the rest of the world, communion under both species is really not common. It's something that as Americans, we can do this. It's something extra. We're going to do it. Uh-huh.
One more question, and this is just a little off topic.
Okay.
I was here for a funeral mass and saw black vestments. I hadn't seen that in 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
I thought a funeral mass was a celebratory thing again, and you wore white.
Well, but is everybody celebrating at the funeral mass? No. Like, we had the funeral of Matthew Small a month or so ago, who was a young father of 7. His 7th was born like 2 days before he died. He died tragically of cancer. Most people weren't like, "All right, yay, he's got a chance to go to heaven." It was heartbreaking. And so most people, when they come to a funeral, wear black or at least dark colors because they're in mourning.
We're not joyful.
And the church can mourn too, right? Jesus at the death of Lazarus wept because he was sad. So the black conveys a certain sense of mourning that the church is doing as well. So there's 3 options for colors to be worn at a funeral or a requiem mass: black, white, and violet. White has become more common kind of because, hey, let's focus on the resurrection and let's falsely call it a celebration of life rather than a funeral whereby we're praying for this person. A lot of funerals turn into an opportunity for us to comfort one another, and it's like, hey, it's okay, everything's fine, everyone goes to heaven. Let's all be happy and not remember anything that was sad. And that's just not how human nature works. So I just chose, it was a gift to me, like all my vestments, and I chose at funerals, I'm going to exercise the option to wear black because I too am mourning with the family, and I'm praying for the repose of the soul of the deceased. Now, you'll notice the funeral pall that goes over the casket is white, though. They used to be black, but now they're white because, again, it is a sign of the resurrection. And since the old days, if a child under the age of 7 dies, white is the customary color because it's before the age of reason. And so we say, well, God's not going to necessarily condemn some kid under the age of reason, so we have a pretty decent hope that that child is going to share in the resurrection. And then violet is a penitential color. It's not necessarily a color of mourning, it's a penitential color. So while it's sometimes worn for funerals, because some priests will say, like, I don't want to have the stigma of being the guy that wears the black vestments at the funeral, so I'll just, I'll mix black and white together and get violet. But violet really, because it's penitential, we wear it in Lent and Advent, it's most appropriate to wear violet at a funeral where someone may have committed suicide, because we're penitential. But really, all 3 of the options are legitimate options.
Do you make those choices, or just the
I do. Yeah.
Does that mean that it would be appropriate for a priest to wear black vestments at the Good Friday service?
It used to be up until 1955 or 1962. I don't know when it changed because that's all. But yeah, it used to be that the priest would wear black vestments at Good Friday because it was almost like a funeral for Christ. But then the Good Friday liturgy changed a little bit, and it's red now to symbolize blood of the sacrifice. And, every once in a while I'll get people that'll ask about the black, and they're like, really? Like, I thought we don't do that anymore. I'm like, yeah, but most priests don't, I know. But the vast majority of people will look and, wow, those vestments are beautiful. I've got a whole list of ladies from parishes that I've been at. They're like, we want you to do our funeral when we die, and we want you to wear those black vestments with the silver trim. Yes, ma'am.
Do you?
I will when they.
So that answers your question. You can have white.
No, I'm saying they asked me specifically to wear the black.
That's what I asked you before. Can the families choose or do you always?
I pretty much always choose. Yeah.
But the family could ask.
They could give their input. Like, if it was going to be really, really upset. So, I mean, I'm not a monster. So, if it were going to be like really upsetting, Father, we don't do that anymore. I can't believe, okay, I'll wear violet. It'll be penitential. Or I've worn white for funerals. I mean, when I can celebrate funerals with other priests, I wear white because that's what most wear. But I think that there's an important value to the fact that the church mourns with people. I've got a funeral coming up on Monday. It's a very unexpected death. He was only, I think, 60 or 61, and his wife is just beside herself. And so I want to join in the mourning.
I have a pronunciation question.
Okay?
When we talk about, is it archangel or
Archangel.
arc?
Yeah.
But it's spelled A-R-C.
Yeah, and we say archdiocese, but we also say through, and we say cough, and we say whatever other words we spell O-E-U-G-H. Yeah, archangel.
Archangel.
I mean, I guess archangel wouldn't be wrong, but in other languages that sound similar, it's Spanish arcángel, so it's a hard K.
We just need to spell it different.
You have no questions, Mr. Pinnock?
Well, I was just going to ask.
You got one more minute, okay? Because I'm holding you over 30 minutes.
All right, here's the deal. When I was a youngster coming up, we were always taught not to say the rosary during Mass. Focus on
That's good.
what's going on. You don't pray the rosary during Mass. Is that still?
Yeah, you ought not pray the rosary during Mass.
Right.
But some folks,
before and after.
they, Grandma said, hey, let's pray the rosary during Mass because we don't know what Father's doing up there, and so we'll just.
Okay,
That's it?
that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Carl, nothing? No. You did a really good job. Well, thank you. Well,
It's very informative.
this is a topic that I really enjoy talking about, and that next year we're going to, rather in the fall, we're going to kind of launch a series that will focus a lot on the Second Vatican Council, what the church taught, what people thought the church taught, how it might have been interpreted, how it might have been implemented, either properly or improperly, and then kind of, that's why you young priests are like, you're not. It's not that you're unbending and unwavering, and it's just that you're trying to do what the church says. And so I want to have an opportunity to be able to share that with y'all, both Father Michael and I, so that when they're out, like, how come you have 6 candles? How come you wear black? How come you wear cassocks? How come all these things?
How come the tabernacle's at the back of the church at some places?
That's a great question. I don't know. The Second Vatican Council never said anything about that. But yeah, just a lot of the little like, hey, I thought that Vatican II changed this or that, and let's look at the documents. Let's look at what the documents said and understand what the church teaches and how it was or wasn't implemented correctly and how we should view it. And I think in some ways we can look and say, we can look and understand why there's been a decline in church attendance, why there's been a decline in belief in the real presence, because some of the attempts of opening the windows and letting the fresh air in went too far. The baby got tossed out with the bathwater. St. Paul, again, Paul VI said somehow, did I say that at the beginning or no? I don't think I did. That's the important, so John the 23rd opened the windows to let the fresh air in after the Second Vatican Council was over and some of these abuses were occurring. St. Paul VI, Pope Paul VI, said, the smoke of Satan has entered into the church through the opening.
Is the renewal and getting to know more about that, is that something that's just recently, bubbled up to the surface
No.
again? We didn't talk about it 10 years ago.
I know, and you asked me this last time I gave one of these talks, and this is the reason why I decided to kind of launch this series in the fall. It's just because you've got priests that were and bishops that were there, and then you've got priests and bishops that were in the seminary when it was going on, and you've got priests and bishops that were in the seminary when the implementation was happening, whether it was flawed or not. And then you've got a period of formation of priests, particularly like in the 80s and early 90s, where they're being formed by the ones that kind of, well, this is how we interpreted it. You hear the spirit of Vatican II, not what the document said, but this is the spirit behind what the document said. And then you've got priests in the 90s that kind of started, wait a minute, and then you've got Father Michael and my generation where we were taught by those priests and we're like, hold on a second. And it's not common for a 19-year-old to go into the seminary these days, and if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be a priest, I really want to, what does the church teach? And I want to teach it as full-throated as I can. I don't want to water anything down, and I don't want to, push anything aside. I want to say, no, this is what we teach, and this is what we need to believe, and I'm convicted by it, and that's why I'm a priest. I'm not a priest so that I can be a bachelor. I'm a priest so that I can love Jesus and so that I can lead you to him. And as I say all the time, so I can get you to heaven. That's my goal. And I feel very strongly that if I water anything down or if I push things aside, then I'm failing in the attempts in my sacred duty to get you to heaven.
Are there any teaching masses that might?
So So if we did something like that, what it would be is it would be probably like a 45-minute to an hour session before Mass, where we went through everything and said, maybe pay attention to these things, and then we would say Mass. I don't like the idea of a teaching Mass because you're breaking up the Mass, and some priests will do it where they'll say, okay, this part I can explain, and then once the liturgy of the Eucharist starts, I can't. And then you've got some that are like, well, I'm going to talk between the consecration to explain what, and so, yeah, I'm just very uncomfortable with teaching Masses, but I would be more than willing, maybe on a Thursday night, to have an hour-long session that would maybe start at 6 o'clock, and then, or maybe it would even be, on Sunday, we could do it before 5 o'clock Mass.
That'd be great.
But it would be a session of teaching followed by, but that might be best done after we've gone through kind of our series, and I hope that's something that will excite you. I mean, you're here, it's been an hour and 35 minutes and you haven't got up and walked out yet, so hopefully this is something that is at least intriguing to you, and I hope you invite other people next time, and whenever, August or September when we start over, because I think this is something that can really help to rejuvenate our church. I agree. Okay? It is past everybody's bedtime and it's almost dark, so I know some of you won't be able to drive.
That's why Sally's driving.
Okay.
not me.
So we'll close. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all very much.